It's an honor for me to talk about with you all today about Laibach's career, the ups and downs, and how the band managed to gain international relevance despite adverse circumstances. And of course, we will talk a little bit as well about North Korea. And the audience will have the opportunity to direct some questions to Mr. Novak. In an interview, you once told the story that you were in a Berlin music store, and when the salesman asked you where you guys were from, the conversation took an interesting course because he thought Slovenia was part of Poland. And the uncanny thing about it was that it happened in 2014. So does this happen a lot still?
Yeah, I mean, it happens, well, not so much more here in Europe, but still, there's still that kind of situations. It happened here in Austria, you know, to tell you the truth. We had, when Yugoslavia already broke up, we had a meeting with some journalists, and she hardly knew where Slovenia was, Austrian journalist, and she was asking me things like, do you have a toilet paper, and you know, things like that.
How do you react to something like this? I mean,
no, of course we don't. I mean, we use hands. Why should you? You know, we are ecological.
Where in Austria was this?
In Graz.
Oh, well, that's very close to the Slovenian border, actually.
Yeah, practically, you know, Slovenian city almost.
Oh, yes. So in 1987, you signed a contract with Mute Records, a London-based label, and you recorded your third studio album, Opus Dei. How did Laibach manage to, at that time, as a band from at that time Yugoslavian Neverland, to get to sign a contract with a label that had quite prominent musical acts on it and on its roster?
It's quite a long story.
We have time.
How did we reach Mute? It's when we started back in 1980. We created a plan quite soon, 1981-82, a written plan. I still have it at home somewhere, and it was written. We have to sign an agreement with one of the independent labels, and they were listed down. Maybe Mute was not on the first place, but it was pretty much up. Mute Records, Factory, 4ID, you know, Cherry Red Records, etc. We had the list, and of course we went in 1982. We went for the first time in London to visit all these offices of these record labels, except Factory, which was based in Manchester, I think. And of course, we had no money, so it was, you know, we never were before in London, so it was quite an adventure.
You even couldn't afford toilet paper, right?
First time we saw it. Actually, we lived in those, you know, partly in those squats where toilet paper was a real luxury. And we went, you know, from office to office, from label to label. After we kind of started to learn how big London is and where are these labels, what are the addresses. It was quite an adventure. Also, we were dressed in Yugoslav army uniforms, which were at that time our official outfit. And we came to Mute. We met Daniel Miller. We gave him the tape. Mute was then still in a small office. We gave him a tape. He liked what he saw, but he was, you know, he was very nice. He was kind of curious. Who are these guys? You know, they're really, you know, strange and so on. Well, what is this? But he liked us somehow straight away. But he also let us know later on. We gave him really, you know, early industrial tapes, which were quite difficult to listen. They were not exactly Depeche Mode. We were not exactly Depeche Mode, but it was lots of electronic sounds. And he told us that maybe some other time, that he's like interested, let's stay in touch and so on. And of course we went further. Later on we signed with Cherry Red Records, which was also an independent label. We recorded one album and some singles for them, on the basis of the concert that we did in 1982 in London, and one of the editors saw the show, and he was totally like, wow, this is better than Sex Pistols. And it was a total chaos on the concert because everything went wrong. That's why the concert was so good. So we signed with Cherry Red, and while we were recording one of the tracks in some London-based studio, Oasis, in Kentish Town, I think it was. Mm-hmm. In 1984, there was Daniel Miller was mixing Depeche Mode in another studio in the same house, and he was passing by our studio. He heard what we were doing. It was this song called Panorama, based on Gustav Holst, the classical composer. And he really liked what he heard. Again, he came in the studio. He didn't recognize the band anymore, but he said, wow, what is this? This is interesting, and so on. So this was our second meeting with him. And then later on, it happened that Mute Records moved. This was 1986, that they moved in the same house where Cherry Red Records had the offices, but a floor below. Mm-hmm. So we were constantly, when we were there, we were constantly seeing, the bands from Mute, Nick Cave on the stairs, and everybody else. And Mute was really, very sexy record label. Lots of things were happening there, more successful to a certain extent than Cherry Red, which was a bit more, stiff. So we constantly were seeing these guys and, going up and down, seeing the office inside. What's happening? Anyway, and when we recorded Nova Kropola for Cherry Red, and it was quite a successful album in alternative terms, in the independent music, getting some good reviews and so on. Somehow, the secretaries of Cherry Red and Mute were good friends, and they discussed among themselves. And so it came that the secretary at Cherry Red told us, Mute is kind of interested in you. They are maybe even considering to sign you and so on. Would you be interested, and so on? So we were, we did all our official discussions through the secretaries on the personal level, and then but we got a clear message from Mute at some point that they are not ready to sign with us if we are not going to come with some kind of manager. Okay. Because they wouldn't trust, Eastern European communist band dressed in military uniforms of Yugoslav army, just like that. Especially considering that, anyway. And so at that time we had an interview with some really good-looking black journalist female. She was very much a fan of Laibach, and because she was articulate, she knew some things about music industry. Apparently, she went out with David Bowie also before. So we said, "Yeah, would you be our manager?" So that we, signed this album, signed the contract with Mute. And she said, yes, why not? Let's do it. So we brought this attractive-looking woman with us. We dressed in Yugoslav army uniforms, and she was really sexy, black beauty. And Daniel Miller was basically, kind of weak on black girls, also all the others. And that's how we got the contract.
All right. So the music industry has changed a lot, and it seemed like networking is no longer the problem or the main problem. But to stand out and to have real success is still difficult. What advice would you give young bands? how can they draw attention to themselves?
We wouldn't give them any advice. Let them fight as we did. That's the best thing. They have to find their own way, basically.
So
just don't listen to any advices. That's the only advice we would give them. Learn by yourself. I mean, we didn't have any clue, totally nothing, and we actually learned everything through practice, so to say.
So that you wouldn't say that there is a surefire strategy how to find international partners when you come from a country that lacks of like musical infrastructure?
Well, to tell you the truth, in the times of Yugoslavia, there was more musical structure than it is today.
Oh, yes?
I mean, not that every of 6 republics almost, maybe not every, but, there were some state record companies who actually worked quite well. We were getting licensing albums already in 60s of, Beatles, Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, and so on. And they, in 60s and 70s, they actually supported alternative music quite much. Of course, there were things missing and so on, but, to a certain extent, music scene was more developed in the times of Yugoslavia than it is now, because now medias, for instance, are monopolized, more or less, and there's no more, because of the situation which is happening in the music industry. There's hardly any label existing still who would support an artist properly. Now the chaos and the infrastructure is actually much worse than before. Of course, you have some record labels who are, but they are pretty much forced to, if they want to survive, they're pretty much forced to follow the market, which is banal. So if there wouldn't be, places like, there's this venue in Slovenia, there are totally underground venues which they still work, and there's the Šiška, the famous Šiška venue where Slovenian, when Ment is happening, they kind of support as much as they can, the alternative music. But in terms of concerts, we had much more huge concerts, big concerts in the times of Yugoslavia than now. The first guy who came, this happened after Tito broke with Stalin in 1948, and he basically said quite soon, let's now change a little bit the whole style and everything, also in music and art, let's get a bit freer, not totally, but a little bit more, who is that guy, that black trumpet player, Sačmo, bring him in. So, Louis Armstrong came twice to Slovenia in 1958, approximately around then. And that's how the story with big concerts started. Jazz music was very strong. Popular jazz music was very strong in 50s, already in 60s. And then, all kinds of versions of Elvis Presley lookalike guys and Rolling Stones lookalike groups and so on in 60s and 70s. We had great scene, great, even in the smaller cities like Trbovlje, we could watch excellent Yugoslav rock bands who were not super inventive, but for us that was really good, nevertheless, because they basically translated the foreign musical forms and performing, which is not happening nowadays anymore, because it's nowadays it's the style which is prevailing is it's pretty much vulgar folk or turbo folk music and so on. And I remember concerts that I saw as a kid, like my first concert when I was a child in Ljubljana. There were Blood, Sweat and Tears in a huge sport venue in 60-something, I don't know, 8. And later on, we had all kinds, everything from Queen to Nirvana, David Bowie, everybody. And this is not happening anymore nowadays, because these acts are too expensive. They don't come. If they do, they come. And now we only have in the big venues we only have Michael Bublé and things like that.
That's sad.
The late 70s, did you know X-Files Festival
test department didn't exist in late 70s yet. They started after Laibach. No, it was, I think, 81, 82 they started. Yeah, we got informations. Of course, we were, we knew about, but that was end of 70s. We knew about, because for instance, there's one really good station in Slovenia, a radio student, which was created in end of 60s, beginning of 70s, which is super alternative radio. It's one of the things that students got after the student strikes in end of 60s, early 70s. And it still exists, radio station, of course, but nowadays the situation is different because of all the internet radios. But they have performed, all kinds of music from that they got somehow from the West, including, groups like, I don't know, pop group, for instance, who was a very interesting group, Cabaret Voltaire, all that stuff. There were festivals of rock in opposition groups. Punk was very strong end of 70s in Slovenia, beginning of 80s. It was a total chaos. Everything was happening. Things were happening, not only in Slovenia, but also in Yugoslavia. So we did have lots of information, and this was really good. We were not without the knowledge. Of course, we idolized those groups a lot, and when we went out, we had some kind of ideas. What do we want, But it was much more vivid scene than nowadays, so to say.
And for instance, you told the story how you went to London, but with Walter Ulrich, for instance.
Sorry?
With Walter Ulrich,
yes.
Did he find you?
Well, we did a first European tour in 1983, the so-called Occupied Europe tour. This happened because we were forbidden in 1983 in Slovenia. For 5 years, and Yugoslavia. But we said, okay, if you don't like us here, we'll go out, the world is big. So we went on the tour somehow with the British band Last Few Days, whom we met a year earlier in London. We were at a famous event called Final Academy, where there was Psychic TV, 23 Skidu, Cabaret Voltaire, Last Few Days concerts. William Burroughs was doing his readings, Brian Guys, and all these guys. So, and it wasn't a big event. It was a small thing, so to say, quite intimate. But we were there for 2 or 3 days, and we really liked the concept of Last Few Days, which was, something like an early form of what is this Icelandic band, the famous Sigur Rós, a kind of early form, much more industrial, ambiental music, and we liked them a lot. So we became friends, and we said, okay, let's do the tour. They didn't have a clue about music industry. We didn't have a clue about music industry touring, and we somehow succeeded to arrange, half of the shows, and they did the other half. We did Eastern Europe. We went through. Our first show was actually in Vienna, in Arena, but the old arena somewhere. And we heard Laibach on the radio while driving to Vienna. We said, now we are big stars. There will be lots of money. So we went to Arena, then Budapest, and then we should go to Czechoslovakia, and they wouldn't let us through on the border. We went back to Budapest, back to Vienna, around Czechoslovakia, through East Germany and Poland. We had quite a few shows in Poland. And then, East Berlin to West Berlin. Anyway, Copenhagen, Germany, a few shows, Holland, Belgium, Denmark, and we ended up in London with the show, with the final show in Diorama venue. And it was always, we were playing with the Last Few Days, and one day we were the first and they were the second, and next day it was the opposite. We had no instruments. We were stealing instruments from them. Not only instruments, but also the drummer and the bass player and so on. Uli Reberg from Walter Ulrich Schall-Folien. He saw our show in Hamburg. He actually came to see last few days, but he was totally bewildered with our show, and he said, "I want to sign with you." That's the way how he speaks. "I want to sign with you the record deal." Oh, perfect. And he was not the only one. We actually signed several record deals on that occasion, because we didn't know that you cannot sell the same material to different record companies. So we kind of put them out on several different labels. But the episode with Uli was really nice, because we of course we had no money, and we were hitchhiking through Austria, Germany, the two of us, with record tracks to Hamburg. It was really funny with all this hitchhiking in the rain, and And we were staying in Reeperbahn for 2 weeks. First time we see something like that, Reeperbahn. Not even that. We were staying at the Große Freiheitsstraße, in Yugoslav army uniforms, which was really nice. We were getting good friends with all those girls and so on.
So how's the Slovenian music scene now? In an interview you once told that you're taking a lot of space up for these new bands to thrive. Is that still your opinion?
Sorry?
That you would be taking too much space for Slovenian bands to grow?
Yeah, the situation of Laibach in Slovenia, we are fed up with ourselves, so of course all the alternative bands and everybody's fed up with us as well, to a certain extent. But, so we are not trying to expose ourselves too much within Slovenia, but still we do several shows every here and there, and we are trying to, to do good concerts, good events. And one thing that we do also is that we kind of incorporate some musicians that we find really interesting into Laibach from independent music. Usually those who have most things to say against Laibach, we incorporate them, and they come and they become part of the group, and they still have their own group, so that's how they learn a little bit. So this is our, we kind of teach them a little bit what's the music industry and what does it mean touring and so on. So I think that partly we do our pedagogical work in that way, but yeah, of course there's enough space for everybody, but I still think that they should find their own way, and we have given them enough occasions to think how to, succeed in the international market, if they would only listen. But usually they don't. They still want to sound like American groups, British groups, which is what we never actually did.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about your trip in North Korea. I need to tell you a story. So, Nico, he visited your concert in North Korea, and since August 2019, the USA has tightened the entry rules for tourists to North Korea.
You were refused?
No, not yet. Well, if you want to apply for the ESTA visa, you need to say that you have been to North Korea. So you have to apply for a tourist visa or a business visa. You can't go there by ESTA anymore. What do you think about that?
Yeah, North Koreans, they're funny, but I think that they're doing that without any logic, really. It's just something that, we have funny stories with North Koreans also, especially with this guy who was the head of the international committee, the one, if you have seen the film, the one who was having the speech, how bad is Laibach and so on. So this guy, recently came to Slovenia with his assistants, and he called me up from Maribor. He was totally drunk and happy to talk to me and so on. We should meet, but I couldn't. And then, he's traveling quite a lot around, and North Koreans are just. I don't think that they are doing anything very rationally. I don't know this problem. But it's the situation there is changing on daily basis, and I know that they're trying to open country as much as possible, partly, but on the other hand, of course, there are tensions. The other tensions that they're trying to close the country.
Yeah, I think the problem here is that the US is trying to stop tourism to North Korea, so they make it difficult for you if you have been to North Korea, which is.
I don't know. Morten, the guy who brought us to North Korea, he was there again a few times, and now he has a little bit of a difficult time. But it seems the situation is kind of losing again. Loosening again. So they still want to work. It is international cultural exchanges because they have this committee and they have to do things. And Morten always brought them a lot of Swedish, actually Norwegian money, oil money. So I guess it would be. I already spoke to this guy. I said, well, when you and when North Korea and South Korea would reunite, then we should perform again. And he said, yes.
What is there anything the world can learn from North Korea?
I think a lot. No, I think a lot. But the situation in North Korea is extremely complicated, and I don't want to go into details here because I don't know everything. But even from the short time when I was there, I was able to do some conclusions, which are much different from general conclusions and that political analysts have. Just to simplify as much as possible, I think that North Korea is of course a prisoner. The entire country is a prisoner of China and United States. And all these talks that are happening now between Kim Jong-un, who I think is trying really hard together with his sister, but he's a prisoner number one in the country. He has some power, but not all of it, because there are also old forces and so on. North Korea is a mafia state that functions purely through black market with China. It depends on China. It's dictated by China. It is exploited by China. And all these talks that are happening with Trump now, basically, it goes, if I simplify, it is Chinese they said they will give them the green light to reunify with South Korea, which is what North Korea would like to. And some people in South Korea also, not too many. But, they have to get Americans out from South Korea, because America has a strong military base in South Korea, which is actually there to control China. And that's not the only base. There are another approximately 30 military bases around China, and they basically exist only to control China. And West Chinese Sea, which is important trading way. So the situation is, of course, in details, it's much more complicated, but this is the rough story, and of course nobody is really interested. China doesn't want America on their borders. Americans don't want to get out of South Korea because they have their own interests. So nobody is really interested in reunification of North and South Korea, and not even the nomenclature, a big part of nomenclature in North Korea, which is very militant and, as I said, black market mafia system. So it's a difficult situation. On the other hand, people are fantastic. And they are forced to practice some kind of, knowledge, some kind of wisdom, because if you live in such system, I mean, you simply have to either live with it or try to get out. But many people who actually succeeded to escape, they returned back to North Korea because they couldn't live out, because they were, third-class citizens, and they simply couldn't cope with South Korean totalitarianism, which is much heavier than, in a way, than North Korean one. It's a tough thing, but they have. It's like living in a monastery.
So, since you have been to the most totalitarian state in the world, what's next?
The most totalitarian state is United States.
Okay, can you go any further?
I don't know if I should talk too much about this, because I have bad experiences with when we talk too much and then in the end it doesn't happen. But we are discussing about a very, very interesting project that we would like to do with Iranians in Tehran and also later on in Europe. It's a big project. If it happens, maybe next year, end of next year, and then 2021. And this is one of our projects that we are working on it at the moment.
Wow.
It's a different situation, of course, in Tehran completely, but we were there. We are very curious about the country and their culture and the music scene and so on. Not even the popular music scene. I mean, their popular music scene, not the one which is, hip hopping and electronic dancing and so on. But the original music scene. Yeah.
So we don't have much time left. Are there any questions? There must be.
Could you make another Laibach in 2019?
In 2019? But we have another Laibach. I mean, lots of people are saying this Laibach has nothing to do with the original Laibach. I mean, we already said at the very beginning.
No, I mean, just like how much can provocation nowadays mean in music? How much is possible? Because you've been involved with
I think, for instance, this North Korea has shown it was a so-called successful move in terms of provocation. I mean, all the world media reacted, with the same kind of stupid, most of them with stupid accusations of North Korea and Laibach and so on. And so that was a form of provocation.
So if you have stupid countries, you still can make some kind of provocation.
What?
If you have countries which are controversial enough, you still can make, the whole concept of communistic regime back in our time.
Yeah, it's not only communism. I mean, I tell you, when we tour in the States, sometimes when we succeed, and it's getting heavier and heavier, and I think we succeed to maybe not provoke the entire country, of course, but the audience there, it's not all about provocation, but nevertheless provoking in a good terms, and audience is really grateful that we do some shows in the States.
There during the Trump times recently?
No, we were not. He didn't invite us to his inauguration. Otherwise, we offered ourselves, but he wasn't listening. I mean, although we have his wife, actually a friend of us, so to say. His wife is a friend of a friend. But yeah. I don't know, it's always, I mean, what we are trying to do, we're trying actually, first of all, we're trying to provoke ourselves when we do new things, because we are fed up of ourselves. We don't want to, keep on going on and, perform Life is Life or things like that. And in that respect, of course, we are still curious and interested in music and so on, and although music is not our first, it's just a material that we use. But we see our mission on a different level. How to, first of all, we'd like to make some seriosity in this field of culture, which is still taking us totally unserious. You know, it's not a problem if you, for instance, just to make a banal comparative. It's not a problem if you're Marlon Brando and go around in Nazi uniforms and do the film, you know, and so on. So film is a different story, and theater is also a different story. It's just a theater, you know, and it's just a film. But if you do that, something like that, inside the popular culture, inside music, for instance, it's a different thing, and this is a good thing because it means that this media has a more, you know, that it has more. It's less defining, so to say. It's more. They take it much for real. So there is something in music. In this side of music, like for instance, you know, the division. Who are you for, Barcelona or for Madrid, Real Madrid or whatever? This was in music. Are you listening Beatles or Rolling Stones? And these were actually the tribes, and then there were, you know, other bands like Who and I don't know, all kinds of tribes who represented a certain ideology through what they were doing, through the form and through the behavior and so on. And music used to have much stronger meaning, and this is what has gone nowadays, totally. Nowadays it's more important, are you having an iPhone or Samsung or whatever, you know. This is the point of identification, which is quite sad because, you know, music still should be able to create some meaning, much more meaning, and this is what's missing.
Questions and what do you predict for the music industry?
I hope it's going to collapse. I mean, seriously.
You've been watching the music industry for almost 40 years now, and speaking of identification, Laibach has always produced a lot of stuff around music, especially merchandise. I mean, it's one of the most interesting.
Well, we did merchandise. We did out of necessity because we realized that we can, you know, earn more with merchandise than with the concert itself. So it kind of is covering half of the costs, if not more, that we are doing, that we have on the tour. And also we do enjoy producing some interesting merchandise, yes. But we started actually inside art, so to say. There's an exhibition at the moment in Vienna at the art market or something, where we are contributing also. We don't like art that much. I mean, we like it, but not as it is. We don't like to use the word art. But art was our first form of expression, so we did our first things in galleries, and we were trying to, because the thing is that in 70s in Yugoslavia, conceptual art was incredibly strong. And I don't think that expression art is the right one, but conceptualism was very, very strong, which is a philosophical form of art, and we learned a lot from Yugoslavian conceptualists, like, you know, also Marina Abramović, who is now something else than she was back in 70s, and people like that. And that's why we started to work in galleries originally, but then we realized that pop music, actually music, that it has bigger, you know, in a way bigger power, in social terms.
Than art, yeah. And how has like the income shifted over those past 40 years? Because I imagine you made a lot of money from like publishing music.
We don't, no. No, we don't. We are. No, I wouldn't even talk about that. It's a shame, you know. We are just not successful financially, but it doesn't matter. We are still alive, you know. And we don't need much money, so to say.
Which is a good thing.
It's a good thing, you know. You have to. It's ecological. You have to learn, you know. You have to.
40 years. I fully understand this, and we know each other for quite some time. But what would have been actually certain stages where you somehow say, today I would have made a different decision on this or that, and the paths were going to a different direction?
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, we like pop music to a certain extent, you know, but we realize that, you know, our singer is never going to learn how to sing. And that's good, that's his quality.
One question, would you basically like to control and to own all your recordings by yourself, or do you actually do this?
Well, working with Mute, in a way we are doing it. I mean, it is, but we don't, you know, because before we didn't have a clue about how the music industry works, and now when we have, it's really the only thing which is still relevant is publishing rights, and you know, we are quite happy to you know, to deal it with Mute, because you know, they kind of help us a lot on the other side. We don't have, Mute is still important. It's not that important as it used to be, but it's still important independent label. And we have a really good relation with Daniel Miller, whom we respect deeply. And as long as I think that this relation is going to last, we will probably stay with Mute, except if we get, of course, a really good offer from Warner.
Well, this was about 10, 15 years ago.
Wasn't good enough. You know, we are all prostitutes, as pop group says.
So there's time for last question.
People say that wouldn't be there, right? Or there will be no Rammstein.
That would be really good, I think. No, sorry. I mean, I'm impressed by Rammstein because what they do. I mean, they actually became the biggest European live act after Rolling Stones, of course. But for that, they will have to eat much more drugs and so on. No, I mean, I'm impressed by them. But you know, we met several times, and we told them, "Wow, you did all this," and they said, "No, it's all shit. I mean, what you did, that's really huge, and no, but you have lots of money, and no, we spend everything for production, and it makes nothing. You can do art, you do whatever you want, and so on." So it's, I wouldn't talk about respect. I mean, I think they respect us more than we respect them, but this is our problem. No, but you know. They are really. It's not easy. It's a tough thing being Rammstein, and it's a tough thing being Laibach too. But we can, you know, I don't know.
Your last chance.
Thanks for coming over.
Thank you for coming over too.
Well then, thank you all for coming over, and thank you for your time and for the insights.
It's a pleasure. I mean, it's not. I'm not sure if it's a pleasure, but you know.